Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Welcome to another edition of The Smoking Barrel. I'm Rustin Edwards, based in Switzerland, with my hot and sweaty co-host there, Mr. Matt Stanley, in the Maldives.
Yeah, I'm here, but kind of not here. I mean, it's amazing having this view, but and the hotel have been incredibly accommodating. There's a lot of people who are kind of locked in. I think the vast majority of people from the UAE seem to be in Thailand, um, and then others. I think some people have gone to the UK. But yeah, look, we're here. We had it booked anyway. We had some insurance that covered. Kepler have been very good as well. The advice I think a lot of people sadly are heeding is get out. And it's I've got to say it's absolutely gutting. It's personal point of view. I mentioned this last week. I met my wife there. We had our kids there. We bought a house there. We renovated, and now it just all seems like, you know, yeah, it's shit. That's all I can say. It's shit.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine it because I could just imagine if that something like that had happened here in Switzerland, where you became in the crossfire of someone else's war,
Yeah,
um, how life would be dramatically upended and changed. Um,
yeah, exactly. And my wife's, she's incredibly anxious. The kid's supposed to be back at school on Monday. I actually had an email. Fair enough. I mean, I know it's all a business. I had an email from the school chasing me for payment for re-registration fee for next year.
well, life goes on. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But I get it. Businesses have to carry on. But yeah, look, where are we? 12:07 here, Monday, 16th of March.
Crude oil 455.
Yeah,
Really only up a buck 40, despite the strikes on Carg Island over the weekend. And structure is still relatively strong. That June SEP back up to
yeah,
11 bucks, almost 12.
yeah. Let me. Where is June set right now? Hang on.
I said almost
Let me
$12.
just. I
So
want
it's
to. So that's up from nine. So that was a high of 18 last Monday, dropped down to about $8, say Thursday. Now we're back up midway. Do you think the market's kind of settled around these numbers?
I think it has because, again, this is when you look at balances in the world, this is a east of Suez issue at the moment. That's where any shortfall you have is sitting there. I mean, because the west of Suez Atlantic Basin seems to be well supplied, seems to be plenty of product as well as plenty of crude. And if anything, with the SPR releases coming out, there'll be more crude than the US or any of the Western refining systems need right now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so if,
absolutely.
if anything, the flows are definitely going to be from west to east, because your gapping hole is in the Far East. Now, when you look at Chinese refineries right now, okay, they've started to cut runs due to lack of feedstocks,
Yeah.
or under Russia or under a government order to reduce exports of products. So, people are being a bit defensive on what they can do around their product supply and product production make at the moment.
Yeah, look, I just want to talk to you about this because look, there's a few things, and I put it in my commentary this morning. Sorry if I'm squinting, just being blinded by the sun. Um, there's a few things that I put on the commentary this morning. What is it that's keeping the lid on prices? Let me just bring up what I sent this morning, but I want to talk to you about this. You can see this, yeah? First non-Iranian cargo crosses Hormuz.
Yep.
Okay. So for me, there's three things that are keeping a sort of lid on prices right now. One, China's got a lot of oil sitting in tanks. I think we've got close to 1.4 billion barrels. That's a comfortable cushion that they have. When they start drawing down on SPR, I think that will be a signal for not panic, but I think we move into the next wave of pricing once that happens. Secondly, the IEA 400 million barrels of emergency releases. We think that's around 45 days worth of supply. So that's another cushion. And then thirdly, the
Well,
Russia waiver
Well,
angle.
that's 400 days of supply or 45 days of supply at normal demand pull of
Right.
80 barrels a day, 80 million barrels a day of crude.
Yeah.
However, the shortfall in the market is not 80 million barrels a day. So you're really looking at plugging that missing 7 million barrels that's missing because of the closure of the straits.
Right.
So that 400 million barrel release has a lot larger patch.
Okay. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Look, I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out. I think they sort of how does that get released? I.e., which region? They're starting with Asia and Oceania first. I read, then Europe, and then I don't know. I'm not saying
Well,
anyone is more.
and further to the United States with their 170 million barrel release, that was clarified on Friday. It's not an outright sale; it's a swap.
That's a swap. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what we were arguing about last week. Is that it's short term bearish, but long term bullish. But this is what I think how the dynamic of the conflict shifts. What do we call this conflict? Some people are calling it the Ramadan War. Some people got the Battle of the Strait of Hormuz. I couldn't give a shit what it's called. It's the Middle East conflict. But what we've seen the last few days, and we've seen this is an important development. We have seen up to 20 tankers that have currently crossed the Straits of Hormuz since it was deemed closed. What we saw over the weekend, which is important, was the first non-Iranian crude oil cargo. This is an Aframax. I'm not sure this data is spot on. Look, we were talking about this traffic separation scheme, right? Which I know a lot of people have asked us a lot more on that. This routing here is highly unusual.
Well,
Can you? I
well,
mean, can
is
you
that
talk us through
AIS
this? What have you
spoofing?
inside? Well, look. What is Sean and hang on. Let's have a look at what they say. Um, 1 second.
Because that's pretty radical movement if you're going into Atesh Island
Well,
there.
no, yeah. Look, it says it has continued to broadcast its AIS signal from the late evening on the 14th, which was Saturday night, while transiting the strait. The vessel's track indicates a highly unusual passage navigating between Keshim Island and Larak Island, putting it squarely inside Iran's territorial waters. Apparently, it's going to the port of Karachi in Pakistan. I mean, look, it's difficult. Look, the whole sort of dynamic of what AIS tracking means, how it works, is it still working, spoofing, GPS jamming, all of this. But your sort of take on this is, I mean, is that? Do you think there's deals that are being brokered, like to cross the Straits of Hormuz? That
Well,
there are
there was
some allowed.
there was a statement made by the Indian foreign minister that they had reached out to the Iranian government to allow LPG cargoes bound for India to transit through.
Right. Yeah.
And apparently two cargoes, or was it three, had made it through the straits heading to India. Um,
Yes.
so yes, I think there are deals being brokered. I'm sure the Chinese government has been talking to whoever's in charge in Iran to ensure that their oil flows will continue.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and you also had stories of the French and the Italian government reaching out to Iran to allow their cargoes or their ships to transit and move without um, harassment as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you do have that going on.
Let's go to the map. Okay, let's go to the map because one thing I'm noticing, and there was an article, I think, I forget where it was. Maybe it was in the national paper. The Houthis, what's happening there? There does seem to be a lot more traffic that's going through the Suez Canal recently.
Yeah.
That's one question, something, but let's
Well,
just have
and
a
you have to
little
think with the
in
Houthis, I
here.
mean, their
Let me
supply
come
chain
out
has
of
been fully
this.
disrupted because, they relied on, for them to be an effective force against the merchant fleet, they need to have a steady supply of weapons and missiles from their support in Iran, and that's not happening right now. So they probably don't have the equipment to
Yeah,
disrupt shipping as
yeah.
people would think.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, it's just so difficult to know what to do with it. This is Skywave, another VLCC that's crossed. It's going to China. So I've got Iranian cargo. I mean, this is a lot more congested than it has been. Of
Well, and also
course,
if you
that's
go
to
back to the
be.
port of Yanbu, I mean, if you look at the amount of ships sitting off Yanbu now, it's showing that the
Yes.
Isthmus pipeline has been, is up full capacity because they have the ships there now to move
Yeah.
out the crude.
Well, I mean, yeah. look, here's Yambu up here, Yambu anchorage. Um, there's a lot of vessels that we've seen that have been fixed, that have been in the east, that are heading to Yambu to load out the Red Sea. Obviously, we saw the unfortunate attack on Fujairah at the weekend. It was crude oil tanks that targeted. That's now back running and operating and loading. But yeah, look, it certainly is. Sorry for the internet. It's a little jumpy, but freight. What's I mean, we went up, we spiked, we came down. Where are we now?
I mean, it's still been grinding lower for the most part. It's still elevated. So when I say grinding
Right.
lower, VLCCs at a week ago were being quoted from U.S. Gulf Coast to Singapore, 28, $29 million. It's now down to 20 million. So still
Oh,
elevated.
only 20 million. I mean,
Only 20
Christ.
million now. It's a deal.
Yeah,
Book them while they're
yeah,
high. Um, and the same thing with a lot of these other routings. I think with the advent of Yambu starting to move cargoes out, that's put I think kind of a ceiling on the route on the price of freight at the moment. It
yeah,
can't, because the one thing that's been happening with the higher freight costs, it's basically been destroying the economics of getting resupply into refineries. Because everybody looks at the current price of oil and say, "Oh my God, refineries must be making tons of money right now." However, when you look at the purchasing of a barrel of crude to go into a refinery, you're talking about a 6 week lead time, maybe four
yeah,
weeks, depending on where you're at. And
yeah,
with the amount of backwardation in the market, you buy a cargo in the prompt that delivers 4 weeks later, that you
yeah,
then process, and it takes you about 4 to 5 days to process that crude into a finished product. You're losing 6 weeks of value in a highly backwardated market. Now, with gas oil, as an example, if you look at the April-May spread,
yeah.
that's $120 a ton in value loss over a
I'm
month.
just going to move one sec. I'm just going to move into indoors because my battery's going to go. Let me just turn off my camera in a minute. But go on, keep on talking.
So with that, and if you start working back from the revenue side of that barrel to the high cost of freight to get the oil in, a lot of refineries are operating with a negligible to negative margin to bring in prompt crude and products because the inlaid cost of logistics is too high.
Right.
And so with that, something has to give. And if it's not going to be the price of gas oil or the price of crude, it's going to be the price of freight.
1 second. 1 second, please, caller. I'm sorry, the old mobile office is agile. It's the bloke operating it that's not so agile. Right, am I back? Yes. I'm in the room. Oh, it's aircon in there. I was talking to you outside. I don't know why. I'm mad. Um, yeah, look, I covered something in commentary the other day, and I was talking to this guy called Tim on his Mirror Business News just now. The price of helium, the price of urea. Suddenly, everyone's a bloody expert on the price of cow piss, or whatever you call it. Everyone's a bloody expert on what it means for what happens to my baby reveal gender party with my helium balloons. Oh my god, they've gone up. But it's not just the cost of crude oil or diesel or jet fuel. It's bloody everything, isn't it?
Well, I mean, when you have crude oil production, natural gas production, you have a lot of other products that are produced from that production, which are then used in other applications. For instance, you said helium. Helium comes out as an associated gas from large natural gas. One of the largest producers of helium in the world is Qatar, which has
Yeah, yeah,
one of the largest natural gas fields because it's an associated gas with the methane that's produced there. When we start talking about urea, urea is an ammonia compound, NH4, which also comes from natural gas. So it's a way you can get rid of your extra natural gas by creating urea, which then goes into fertilizer production.
right. Okay, you put that a lot more eloquently than me saying cow piss. Well, we say how it is, people. Let me just go and get my mouse 1 sec. Go on, keep on talking. I'm here. I'm here. I promise.
So with all those associated project products, yes, it becomes a bit more dynamic, the closure in the Straits of Hormuz, because it's not only crude oil. I mean, I think I've said this a few times that it's not only this material going into out of the Persian Gulf, but it's also material going into the Persian Gulf that has to be considered as well, especially if you start looking at containerized goods that are used to support and bulk goods that are used to support the general populations of the GCC, Iraq, and Iran.
Yeah. I mean, look. I mean,
And that
The-
actually gets very little, there's actually very little being said about container traffic going in and the amount of food and other materials that are brought into the region.
yeah, and this is something that is slowly but surely sort of. I think that issue there you're talking about food security is the kind of, no one wants to let that genie out of the bottle and talk about that. But if we're talking about mitigants, Jebel Ali is essentially closed to everything right now because there's only so much that they can load out and there's only so much they can discharge. There's no through traffic, and that's what Jebel Ali relies on, the biggest port in the Middle East, ninth biggest port in the world. What Jebel Ali has, though, and the UAE have, is the new rail system, where they called Etihad Rail. So their containers and dry cargo can go into the port of Fujairah or Khor Fakkan, where there's a container terminal, and load on as rail cars onto Etihad Rail, and that goes into Abu Dhabi, and then can go where it needs to go, can be trucked. So there is mitigant. There's no panic. Talking to mates and colleagues that I've got who are still in the UAE, there doesn't seem to be. The air is disappointment. That's what I would say is the overwhelming fear, of course, a disappointment in that this has happened, and for those who are still there, belligerence. And I'm not sure. I never sort of thought I would. Okay, how would I feel if there was a conflict and I was involved by proxy? And I think a lot of people, you're either out and you bailed, not bailed, but you've left for security reasons, or you've stayed there and kind of put your finger up in the air. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think that having the ability to look at things rationally is incredibly tough as well. But that's what we try and do here. If we're looking at what happens to jet fuel prices, gasoline prices, within the Middle East Gulf, they are subsidised still, right? The government still set the price for the finished grade of goods. You go to the petrol station, there's always fuel. It's a set price for the month. They set it at the end of each month for the next month. And then food security isn't something that apparently people need to be concerned about. And Etihad Rail has certainly helped hedge that potential risk. What's the sort of when you're heading out for lunch and seeing trader mates and all of that? Does the Middle East sort of conflict dominate discussion?
Um, it does and it doesn't. It does dominate it to a point where everybody has an opinion as to when the straits will reopen or how high crude is
Yeah.
going to go. Right? Because that seems to be, the talking point that everybody has around the conflict is how high will crude go?
Right. And
Um,
what's the view on that? What's the takeaway there?
I mean, you've seen analytics $200 from the Iranian government, which everybody kind of scoffs at.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think, could we get to 120, 130? Sure. But it would need to have a prolonged shutdown in order for that to happen. And prolonged, that's, how long is a piece of string right now? I mean,
Yeah.
if the Hormuz remains shut for another 2 to 3 weeks, I think we grind higher in a price environment to over 110 easily.
Hmm.
Go longer than that, yeah, you're up to 130, 140. But again,
Before, if
it's
I
it's that
well,
mathematics of SPR release of 400 million barrels. How much of a hole are we actually patching with that 400 million barrels?
yeah, and look, I mean, I read an article in the FT at the weekend. Is that most traders are still somewhat calm. They are not. I wouldn't say relaxed. I think there's quite a lot of fear in markets right now. But if I'd have given you a scenario, because people are forecasting scenarios now, not what S&D models tell them, right? Because the S&D models are largely rendered pointless because you have to forecast scenarios before you can get to what it looks like on a granular level from a supply and demand basis, depending on where you're sitting. If I'd have said to you 3 months ago, Christmas time, seems like forever ago now, Russ, Strait of Hormuz is going to be shut for 2 weeks straight. Iran versus the US and Israel and other allies are currently firing drones and missiles at each other. Ships are not moving. Diesel's not moving. Nothing's moving. Where do you think crude oil trades? What would you have said 3 months ago?
I would have easily said over 120.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot. This is the thing. I think a lot of people would have gone, "Well, that's not a situation that we deem is going to happen." Maybe some people did, more pessimistic of people, but we are in that situation. No one has said to me, "I think we hit 190 on Brent." No one has said that because I think it gets a point that you kind of go, things
Well,
people just don't move around, right? It
but
just
but
it
but
just
you
kind of
have but you have the inelasticity of supply and demand, right? Let's go to economics 101. Price of oil goes up to a point where people say, as you just said, I'm not going to drive my car. It's too expensive. Now,
okay.
have we hit those points? Well, we have in the past. We've hit certain points where rationing starts to kick in. If you remember back in the 1970s, let's set the Wayback Machine. United States had the odd even license plate rationing for gasoline in the 1970s due to the crisis during the Arab War with Israel.
Yeah,
Now that granted, that was the GCC and other countries versus Israel, not Israel attacking Iran. But nevertheless, I mean that's an extreme point that we get to that you control consumption and you start cutting those price packs back. But there is a point where I think the general consumer will say, don't need to drive,
don't
and
need to go on holiday.
companies will say, okay, no more business travel. Let's do everything via Zoom.
Yeah,
Let's go back to a COVID type environment, to be honest. And when I say COVID type, I mean business models that were developed during the COVID pandemic could be
yeah.
applied here as well to save energy costs and save travel costs. And all of a sudden, your demand for petroleum drops down to the current supply level.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point. I've been on, the sort of machine that is Kepler that my colleagues have done an extraordinary job, and I have to take my hats off to them. My hats off to all of them. They've been so reactive with clear commentary on what is happening in the commodity world at a point where everyone wants clarity, right? And one thing I was on when I was on Bloomberg this morning, another with Mirror TV, which is a local Middle East based business broadcaster. It sounds weird that a lot of people are sort of referencing back to COVID. Now, COVID is obviously a totally different market dynamic, but that was demand destruction, right? And we saw WTI trade negative because there simply wasn't any buyers because no one needed the oil.
Yeah.
Now you're in a market, now you're in an environment where there is not supply destruction, but supply disruption. The
Yeah.
market hasn't acknowledged that the supply has been destroyed because it's only been destroyed only out of the Middle East. There is
Well, but
still
it's not
oil.
destroyed supply, it's disrupted supply, as you point out, because
Exactly.
oil still, it's not like, oh my God, they destroyed the oil fields. The oil fields are on fire. They're all being burned away. No, it's just that they've curtailed exports out of the Middle East for the time being. And the
Yeah.
only country that's been curtailed is Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar for the most part. And Bahrain
Yeah.
is more products than crude. Saudi Arabia, they're not at 100%, but they're producing and exporting out. I think UAE is balanced, if not anything, through the exports out of Fujairah. Um,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there was some, we saw the DAS cargo, obviously, at the weekend come
and
out, but
Iran is still exporting at the same level they were prior to the conflict.
yeah, we've got that they're about a VLCC every 2 days, so about a million barrels a day,
Yeah.
roughly. It's coming out of car. And I just got to close up because my wife's going to kill me. I'm late for a lunch date because that's what I'm doing now. I'm kind of working and going to have lunch with my wife, which is lovely. Love her very much. 94% of Iran's crude oil gets loaded out of Kharg Island, right? That was struck last week, not from an energy perspective, but military installations in Kharg. We still see cargoes loading. Here's a question. Does it get hit? That's a question a lot of people are asking. Do the US target Kharg, or are they kind of now the focus has moved to ensuring that the straits are going to reopen?
So I think the attack on Kharg Island is a softening attack on Kharg Island to get it prepared for a potential introduction of military troops, because it is a chip that's on the table, and if you take that chip away from Iran, that hits Iran's economy pretty quickly.
Yeah, we wrote
So,
something on
and
the
the only way
notes.
you can,
Yeah,
and you don't want to destroy the oil infrastructure because that is key to the survival of the regime or the country if there's an overthrow of the current regime. And you don't want
Yeah.
to have crude prices go to $170 a barrel because Carg Island was destroyed. So I can see that as a softening. I can also see it as a diversionary tactic, where
Okay.
it's not so much put troops into Carg Island, it's to put troops on Kateth and Lok Island, which are the two islands that surface on the north side of the Straits, on the north side of the Straits of Hormuz, where Iran has missile installations which they can hit ships with.
Right. Yeah. Look, my colleague, I think it was Emmanuel, wrote this. So listen to this. Um, Carg's importance is not only logistical, it is economic. Iran remains structurally reliant on oil exports, which serve as its main source of foreign currency and a core pillar of the state budget. That dependence has persisted despite years of sanctions. We see that production has peaked last year around 1.7 million barrels a day. That means the security of export infrastructure is not a secondary issue for Tehran. It's close to the center of the country's fiscal and external account stability. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Iran has built a secondary export facility outside the Straits of Hormuz. But I believe that can only export a couple 100,000 barrels a day, if that.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Okay, look, yeah, we sit here third week of the conflict, day 17, I think we are
Day
now. It's right.
17.
But look, keep your eye on flat price. Where are we? I think we're still at around $104.50 on
No, we're
Brent.
up
Is
to
that right?
105.68. So we've rallied a dollar since we've been on today.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we're gonna have to see. I've just seen one person is killed in Abu Dhabi after missile falls on civilian vehicle. That's just breaking now. So I hope everyone is well and safe. It's shit. It really is. But just heed government advice and stay, you know.
Stay safe, heed your government advice where if you're in the danger zone, and look out for your loved ones and your families and your friends.
Yeah,
And hopefully this finishes in a lot quicker than everybody expects, and we can get back to a sense of normality.
exactly. But listen, if anyone's got anything they want us to talk about or discuss or something, you know, if I'm being flippant or complacent, me, shocking, then let us know. Comments. Just let you know. There's loads going on. We're fortunate to have the ability to continue these discussions and have some lots of data at hand as well. So let us know what you want us to talk about. But everyone, just stay safe for God's sake.
Yep, click like, comment, and subscribe. We look forward to speaking on the next one, and stay safe out there.
Ciao.